Today's story begins with the main character, Alexandra, being led to the guillotine to be executed. The people who watched all this said that this woman cursed His Majesty and that she was blinded by jealousy and begged to kill the emperor. With all due respect, how could she do that to the son of the empire? When the girl was led to the guillotine, the emperor asked her if she had anything to say in the end. The girl replied that she cursed him because he was only a heartless and cold-blooded hypocrite. What a disgusting husband. Alexandra did not care whether she was alive or not. Even if her body was torn to pieces, he would definitely make him pay for all his sins at any cost. After she said her speech, she decided to ask the emperor if he wanted something for her. But he just ignored her words and ordered to start the execution of the empress. Alexandra could not understand if this was really the man she loved without memory. And even if she suddenly gets another chance to live this life, she will again become an empress and the noblest woman in this country, because she wants to return to him all the humiliation and pain she experienced in full. After the protagonist was executed, the emperor said that despite this girl's grave sins, she was once the empress of this kingdom, and therefore it is necessary to make sure that her funeral was properly held. The protagonist's life began to fall apart ever since she married Cleo Guilliman von Reis. Cleo was a loving husband and the emperor's third son. To enthrone him, the protagonist did everything in her power. Alexandra was not afraid to get her hands dirty with blood or abandon her morals. Even the girl's parents, Marquis and Marquess Sieglinde, took Cleo's crime and were executed instead. Because of this, it was Cleo who was able to walk safely onto the throne. For such sacrifices, the emperor loved and cherished only Alexandra as his empress. At least she thought so, but all she got was the empress crown for the sake of propriety, and in addition to her husband's treason. He's beginning to annoy me. The emperor's bedchamber was always full of new women, and among those women was not the empress, and unfortunately the situation only got worse. In the end, she was accused of having cursed the emperor, and that was how her life ended, the life of a young 26-year-old girl, and because of that, she hated him, because the emperor had trampled her youth and her whole life. Alexandra woke up in her room and heard the maid calling her, reminding her that today was an important day and she had to get ready. The protagonist could not understand what Penelope was doing here because she was dead. After Alexandra became empress, Penelope was killed by robbers when she was 20. The girl even thought that she was in the afterlife, but she couldn't get over the smell she smelled and the familiar sensations. Meanwhile, Penelope began to open the curtains, because today was good weather, and today should be a good day, because there should be an important event. Suddenly, Alexandra asked Penelope how old she was, and the girl answered that she was 16, and reminded the main character that she had organized her coming-of-age ceremony 2 months ago. Sasha could not believe what she heard, because it meant that she was now 21. The girl jumped out of bed and ran to the mirror, and there she saw herself in a wedding dress, which could mean that today was the day that could not be forgotten. That is her wedding. Alexandra could not understand how it could happen, and was very excited Penelope noticed it, and came to the conclusion that the lady was not well. Sasha took advantage of this and decided to confirm these words by saying that she felt dizzy and pushed Penelope out of the room. Alexandra's hands were shaking, and she decided to pinch her cheek to make sure she was in reality. She realized that she had gone back in time and got the chance she had asked for before she died, the chance to take revenge on the emperor, and was glad that God had heard her pathetic prayers. But even if this was true, the girl did not understand what she should do next, because her wedding ceremony was coming up, and if she wanted to make a decision to run away, it should be done right now. Suddenly, she was reminded of her past life, in which she swore that she would ascend the throne again and become the noblest woman in the country and return to the emperor all the humiliation and pain she had suffered. So she decided that she could not run away and she would try to live it again. But this time she wanted to be beheaded, not her, but the emperor. Penelope's voice was heard from behind the door, and she decided to ask if she could come in, and Mrs. Alexandra decided to let her in after all. Sasha decided to ask Penelope if she looked good today. The girl smiled radiantly and said that Alexandra was the most beautiful in the whole world. After a while, a maid knocked on the door to announce that everything was ready for the wedding ceremony. Suddenly, the past version of Alexander asked the protagonist that she was sure that she could change the predetermined future, knowing who her future husband really was and whether she could put on a mask to play her role, whether she is really sure that his head will be chopped off and not hers. After all, the most suitable option would be to just run away and forget about it all. Besides, you can find a more suitable husband and finally be happy. You don't have to be an emperor's wife. There are many other ways to get revenge. The protagonist could not understand how she should just take and forget about everything and live as if nothing had happened, because she still had the feeling of a cold, killing her blade on her neck, and just live happily and forget about everything was too difficult a task. When Alexandra came to the wedding ceremony, the emperor told her that she looked great, after which the Holy Father asked Alexandra Giovanna Jean Zaglinda if she agreed to take Cleo Guillemina von Race as her husband, and swore to love him to remain faithful and sincere. The girl agreed, after which the Holy Father asked the same thing to Cleo, and the latter said the same thing. Alexandra wanted to say that it is a lie, all this man is now openly lying, and asked God to punish the emperor for his terrible and despicable betrayal of his wife. She now firmly swore that she would never again show him any love, faith, and sincerity, but would only curse and hate him too. There was no turning back, for the emperor had already put a ring on her finger, and everyone was sincerely congratulating the emperor and empress. The girls who turned to Alexandra suggested that she must be very happy that such a man as Mr. Cleo himself had become her husband. The protagonist gathered her courage and replied that of course she was very happy to marry him. Suddenly, a girl intervened in the conversation and said that she had heard that Her Highness Alexandra had proposed to the third prince, and she might be very hurt. The protagonist was angry because she had once fallen in love with Cleo, and then she proposed to him to marry her. And of course the girl realized the stupidity of her act, because the principal was 3, but for some reason she chose Cleo out of many emperors. Alexandra answered the girl that she did not think that there was something shameful in it, because the girl herself can offer the guy to marry, and there is nothing terrible in it. Suddenly Cleo came, and Alexandra pretended that she was glad to see him, and then said that she would like to talk to the guests a little more, but she was glad that the emperor had come today, and she would like to spend time with him. Cleo held out his hand and said that he would like to dance with the girl at least one tune. Alexandra agreed only because she had no choice, because she had to play a role and put aside the destructive hatred gripping her soul, and be a pure, drowning in love, a girl. While the newlyweds were dancing, Cleo said that he was incredibly happy next to Sasha. The girl was surprised at what he said and could not understand whether it was a lie or the truth, because before they really had a happy time. Cleo noticed how Alexander's expression changed and decided to ask if something had happened. After thinking a lot, the girl answered that she just remembered her mom and dad, because as soon as she imagines that she will live apart from them, she feels very lonely. The emperor answered that in that case her parents could visit the imperial palace more often, and the girl could also go home to see them from time to time. Alexandra replied that he was right, but for all that, she was looking forward to living in the palace. It is a magnificent and beautiful place, but at the same time it is poisonous, and in the whole palace the most terrible and destructive poison is the emperor himself, and the protagonist knows it very well. When the melody was over, Cleo said that after the reception, he must pay a visit to the Marquise and Marquise Sieglinde, and as soon as everything was over, he could rest. Suddenly, Alexandra realized that her first night with him was the night after the wedding, but she was ready to die of terror when he kissed her, and the thought of such intimacy with him drove her crazy. She wondered if there was any way she could avoid it. There must be some way. Suddenly, she remembered that Penelope takes sleeping pills and decided to borrow them for a day, because if she has sleeping pills, then this evening should pass without incident. Suddenly, a voice came from behind the protagonist, asking why she was standing here alone and where His Highness the Prince had gone. Alexandra realized with horror that it was her parents, and then she rushed into their arms because she missed them very much. The girl decided that this time she would not let her parents be sacrificed. Her parents noticed her strange behavior and decided to ask her if something had happened to her, because she was not like usual today. Alexandra answered that she just missed them very much. Her father was surprised and said that they saw each other this morning, and probably, if other people saw them hugging, they would think that they hadn't seen each other for a year. The main character decided to ask her parents if they will always be on her side, and they began to assure her that it can't be otherwise, because how can they be considered parents if they betray their beloved daughter? Alexandra asked her father and mother not to sacrifice everything, including herself, for her. Her mother stretched her hand to her daughter's face and worriedly asked why she was suddenly asking about such things. The girl wanted to answer that they should not sacrifice themselves because in the past, to crown Cleo because of her stupidity, her parents sacrificed themselves. But Alexandra restrained herself because her parents should not know about her past life. The main character said that no one knows what can happen while a person is alive, and she just wanted to ask them not to sacrifice themselves for her if she doesn't want to. The girl's father surprisingly said that he had no idea why she was suddenly saying such things, but still they would listen to her so that their daughter wouldn't worry. Suddenly, His Majesty the Prince came, and the girl's parents saw him and said they were going back. Cleo suggested that they stay in the palace longer, but the parents of the protagonist replied that they did not want to inconvenience the newlyweds. Alexandra's father approached the prince and took his hand and told him that their daughter was not the best in terms of character, but still he asked him to take care of her. Cleo asked how he could say that, because his daughter was the wisest and most beautiful girl in the whole empire, and he was honored to have such a woman as his wife. The girl's parents were happy to hear this and said that they could not wish for anything more than to hear the emperor say such words and wish them a bright and happy life. It is a splendid and beautiful place, but at the same time it harbors poison, and in it Alexandra's revenge will be accomplished. Cleo and the protagonist need to go to his father's audience. The king greeted the girl and said that the preparation for the wedding should be a lot of trouble, also decided to ask if there were any inconveniences during the ceremony, because he heard that the girl in her own way prepared. Alexandra did not like his behavior, and it was also very strange that the king said such things, although he himself never had any special feelings for his sons. Cleo's father said that Alexandra is quite a young princess, so it may well be that in the palace she will feel confused. The empress, when she heard this, said snidely that she became empress when she was 3 years old, so she didn't think Alexandra was young. Empress Telsi was at one time the last obstacle to making Cleo emperor, and she is not an easy opponent. It seems she has been following the protagonist since the beginning. Alexandra decided not to let her guard down, even if in her previous life she had defeated the enemy. The girl decided to act cautiously and decided to compliment the empress by saying that she was completely overcome by excitement just because she had become a princess. Also because of the fact that Her Majesty at this age has already fulfilled the role of mother of all the inhabitants of the empire, so Alexandra decided to emphasize that this gives her a lot of respect. The protagonist realized that she was just back to square one, as then she needed to somehow dispel the empress's doubts and avoid being restrained. Telsia said that in any case, now that Alexandra has become members of the imperial family, then she hopes that the girl will get used to living in the palace and managing the imperial palace, which is under the empress's jurisdiction, as soon as possible. At least Alexandra has full control over the palace, where she will live. In addition to the main character, is the daughter of a famous noble family, so the empress is confident that she will succeed. Alexandra answered that she is also inexperienced and unsure that she is ready for such a significant role, and she is worried about possible misunderstanding of some points, so the girl decided to ask if she can ask the empress for a recommendation. Telsia was not against it, and said that it was impolite to delay the newlyweds, so she let them go. When Cleo and Alexandra were already leaving, the guy decided to ask the girl about the empress's attitude towards her. Sasha answered that everything was fine, and she didn't think that the empress meant anything bad. Besides, in her position as empress, it's only natural that she has to keep everyone in line. In this situation, when the matter of succession is still unresolved, then he is just a prince, and she is a girl from the Sieglinde family. The emperor has a first son by Empress Vincetia, a second son by Empress Telsia, and a third son by the deceased second empress named Cleo. Not only the princes, but also their mothers are vying for the inheritance, and the protagonist is thrown into the center of this maelstrom of their desires. Alexandra may seem crazy and may even look foolish, but she must go through with it in order to get revenge on him. Cleo asked if he could protect the girl and survive himself. Alexandra smiled and said that of course he would protect her, and she would protect him, and that they would definitely survive. In the moment of triumph of the protagonist, she will definitely present the blade to his neck. The girl said that today was a hard day for them, so she suggested that they put all their worries aside and go to Jen's palace. When Cleo and Alexandra arrived at the palace, they were greeted by maids. The girl introduced herself and said she was glad to meet them. Jen's palace was also once the home of the third prince and his family before the emperor passed away. And these maids had faithfully served Alexandra until she achieved her goal. Cleo decided to ask the girl if she liked the palace, and she replied that she liked everything here very much. Anyway, Alexandra liked this palace much more than Cleo did. Despite his betrayal, the maids of this palace worked for her until the very end. Before Alexandra's return, the distance from her room to Cleo's room had been very far, but now that she was back, it was too close, and so the girl felt terrible. The maid turned to Alexandra and said that she did not know the tastes of Her Highness, but will try to do everything by trial and error based on the words of His Majesty the Third Prince. So if the girl does not like something, she is at her service. The protagonist called the maid by name and said that everything turned out just fine. Elowen was very surprised and asked how Her Majesty knew her name, and she did not remember calling it in front of her. Alexandra realized that she was wrong because she didn't know her name in this life yet, so she decided to say that she heard it from His Highness the Prince. The maid said that she had dared to decorate the room in a color similar to His Majesty's hair, and asked if Her Majesty was satisfied. Alexandra thanked her for her labor and said that His Majesty the Prince would be in her room soon, and so she asked her to help prepare for his reception. Elowen gladly agreed and said that they would bathe first and other people would do the rest of the preparations. Alexandra realized that, for these maids, she was just a young lady excited before her wedding night, with her husband neither more nor less, and they had no idea what thoughts surround the main character. The girl still did not have a child, even after she became empress. Even when Cleo was a prince, he never talked about children, and the girl did not realize whether it was about her or from lack of love. After all the preparations, Alexandra entered the room and asked all the maids to leave the room because she was supposedly very excited and she needed to calm down. When the girl was left alone, she went to the glasses of wine that stood on the table and quickly added a sleeping pill to one of the glasses. And at that moment, the princess was informed that His Highness the Prince had arrived. Alexandra smiled fake smile, and she only had to be patient until the sleeping pills took effect, because it was all for her revenge. Cleo suggested sitting down at the table and having a vocal drink of wine, to which the girl gladly agreed. Alexandra said that she couldn't believe that they had become husband and wife, and it must all be a dream. Apparently, it was a very bad dream, and she would not be able to wake up again. Cleo confirmed her words by saying that when she asked him to marry her, he thought he was dreaming. The girl laughed playfully in response, thinking that in the past she had just been a fool, and now she had to suffer for it. Alexandra decided to adjust to the situation, and said that, to be honest, at the moment when she proposed marriage to her, she was very worried and was afraid that if His Majesty refused her, she would be very sad. The prince replied that he would never dare to reject such a beautiful and intelligent girl, and the fact that she chose him was the happiest event in his life. "She's no longer blinded by you, you fool." Of course, for the prince it is definitely the happiest event, but for the main character, it is a terrible failure, because she got her hands dirty with blood and did all the dirty work, and all this just to say that he loves her. Alexandra said that she thought she was incredibly lucky, because it was hard to believe that the most handsome man in the imperial castle was her husband. Cleo warned the girl that life in the imperial palace is not as peaceful as she might expect, and sometimes there will be difficulties. But even so, he swears to protect her. At that moment in her past life, Alexandra trusted him from the bottom of her heart, because he promised her that he would protect her and that he would love her forever. But he did not keep his word and acted just terrible. And the girl could not understand why he betrayed her and why at some point he changed. The protagonist could not give up, and she no longer needed these feelings. The girl did not notice how she cried, and the prince came to her to wipe her tears, and then he kissed her and carried Sasha to the bed. The protagonist was sick and disgusted by him, and so she begged for the sleeping pills to take effect as soon as possible, and luckily, at the right moment, a miracle happened. When the prince fell asleep, Alexandra took a dagger from the nightstand and cut her leg a little so that the blood would get on the bed. And of course, the protagonist was very tempted to kill him, and she put the dagger to his throat. But she could not just take and kill him, because it was terribly small for revenge. In the morning when the prince woke up, he said that he did not remember anything and his head was all foggy, and remembered clearly only from the moment when he entered the room. The girl only laughed and did not say anything. Cleo hugged her and said that he loved her. Alexandra could not understand whether it was an act or the truth, or whether he wanted to take advantage of her from the beginning, or perhaps his feelings for her had cooled down over time. But in any case, it didn't matter, and whatever the truth was, she had no intention of stopping her revenge. The girl smiled and said that it was time for them to get up, because they had to greet their majesties, the emperor and empress. The prince replied that as soon as they said hello, they would go to rest, as they had a lot to do today. The palace is full of graceful and beautiful things, and behind its deceptive attractiveness hides a sharp blade as if it were a distraction to master and command. When Alexandra and Cleo came to greet the emperor and Empress Vincetia, asked if the girl had rested well that night. The protagonist replied that thanks to his and her highness, she was able to rest properly. Vincetia replied that she hadn't done anything special, but she was still glad to hear that. Empress Vincetia is the first prince's own mother, and Alexandra couldn't understand how the empress could look so affectionate. The protagonist had been fooled by that smile in the past and thought she was a kind person, but now she looked nothing more than fake. The emperor turned to Alexandra and said that it looked like they were going to hear good news soon. Vincetia replied that it was too soon, as the first and second principals were not even married yet. They were both quite young, so she asked not to rush things too much. Telsia asked Vincetia when the first principal planned to marry and looked at the empress with disdain. Now the first prince is 26 years old. If, considering that most nobles marry before the age of 20, then the prince is quite late in getting married. Vincetia replied that perhaps Telsia was right, for she was afraid that she would not be able to see her son married in time. Telsia asked if Vincetia's ideals were too high, and she realized that a royal princess would be more choosy. Empress Vincetia is the Duchess of Igalel, but her mother was Princess Queen Laufez. Normally, such a marriage would not be problematic, but here in the Empire of Rays, where blood purity is valued, mixed blood nobility is not welcome. For the queen, who from an early age had a great sense of inferiority about her origins, the topic of motherhood was very delicate, and of course Empress Diana, who stands a step above her in status and position, does not care about it. Empress Telsia said that the first prince must have a hard time because of such a stepmother, who is unable to keep her mouth shut. The princess replied that she hoped that he would be able to find a beautiful and lovely princess and would do his best to do so. Empress Telsia asked snidely that shouldn't the first prince marry before the second, and that it was a bit wrong that the order was reversed. Vincetia asked if the second prince already had a girl he wanted to marry. Telsia said not yet, but she was very worried about the first prince's marriage and asked him to let her know when he had someone, and it didn't seem too late to start looking. The emperor stopped their conversation and said that he didn't think it was something worth talking about here and now, and told Alexandra and the prince that they could go now, because the princess in particular still had to adjust to life in the imperial palace. The newlyweds bowed and thanked His Majesty the Emperor for his care. The girl thought about the fact that she was even a little tired of all this. Prince noticed it and asked if she was okay. Alexandra replied that everything was fine. Cleo took her hand and told her not to get caught up in talking about children. There was no ulterior motive in her father's words. For some reason, the moment the protagonist heard this, she didn't notice how she asked the prince that doesn't he want to have children with her. Cleo asked if something had happened to Alexandra. The girl replied that she just thought that the prince didn't like the idea and thought that he would say that he would do his best. The prince replied that she can't get pregnant just because she wants to, and if she wants a child so badly, he'll do his best, but he's worried that it might be too burdensome for her. and that's why he didn't say anything. The protagonist is very annoyed because every time he is so kind to her, she feels a crushing pain in her chest, and she clearly remembers the day he decided to execute her and the hatred she felt then. The prince asked if he had misled the girl, and if it was true, he apologized to her for that. The girl hugged him and said that she should apologize to him and that maybe she was tired, and that's why she was more sensitive, and not that she wanted children right now, but she was worried and scared that the prince didn't want children, especially if she got pregnant. They would not be able to enjoy their honeymoon. The main character realized that she looked stupid, and she didn't really care whether he wanted children or not. Even if he wanted a child with her, it wouldn't cancel out the hatred she felt towards him for betraying her. The prince said that he would like to see children like them as soon as possible, but he doesn't want to put too much on Alexandra. Despite the fact that they are husband and wife, they hardly spend time together, such a rule at the imperial palace, and now there is nothing better for the girl. Alexandra asked what His Highness's plans were for today. The maid said that he had fencing lessons in the morning and a cultural class in the afternoon. The girl said that apparently he was busy. Thomas II dared not allow any of his 3 sons to take part in public affairs. He did so because he did not want any unforeseen conflicts to arise at a stage when the successor had not even been determined yet. However, he also made sure that they were properly educated and wanted the 2 sons who would never become emperors to also help the empire. But from another point of view, Thomas II's wishes were very dangerous. It would be okay if they were of the same origin, but they all have different mothers, and Thomas II's wish is more of a utopia. If Alexandra would be the emperor, then she would first of all decide on the successors, and the other 2 princes would not get any education. It sounds cruel, but it is the best way to strengthen the imperial power. And so the girl did not understand what Thomas II was thinking about. Suddenly, Elowin remembered that this morning they received news of Lady Penelope's arrival from Marquise Sieglinde. Alexandra asked that when Penelope arrives that Elowin take her up to speed, and that she can get used to the new place faster. She's a smart girl, so it won't take long. The first thing the girl has to do is to find someone who will share her journey together from start to finish. In this situation, the only and suitable person for this is Penelope. Of course, Elowin was also a loyal maid of honor, but they became friends a little later. Knowledge of the future is undoubtedly a significant advantage, but not everything Alexandra experienced in her past life will be the same as it is now. Knowledge of the future and the actions she takes can change what happens in that future. At that moment, Elowin came in and said that Lady Penelope had arrived and that they were done with the training and arrangement in her room, so she wanted to ask permission to allow Lady Penelope to enter the room and Her Majesty. Alexandra said that she would like to have lunch with her on such a day. The maid of honor replied that she understood the protagonist, but she would bring Penelope in first. Alexandra realized that she should not underestimate the enemy who had been killed in her first life. Penelope entered the girl's room and said that she had come for an audience with the princess. Alexandra was pleased to see Penelope and said that it was unusual to be greeted in this way. The protagonist was very happy to see her best friend because she was still the only one she could trust, and she had a lot of things she would like Penelope to do. The maid of honor said she didn't know how she could be of use to her mistress, but as long as Her Majesty needed her, she would do whatever was necessary. Penelope and Alexandra were having lunch together, and the protagonist decided to ask her friend something because she needed Penelope's help. Sasha wanted the maid of honor to learn something about the distant relatives of the imperial family. The goal of the protagonist to make Cleo the emperor, and then to give him becoming an empress. The girl could answer the question of what would make a person who became emperor feel the worst pain, based on her experience. She wanted to take away the crown he would wear, and his wife would put that crown on another man's head. He certainly deserved it. The pain of disownment and the betrayal, and the girl is sure Cleo can't take it, and to accomplish that, she needs help. Alexandra needs a man who wants to become emperor, and in doing so, he will be loyal to her until the very end. Sasha suggested to Penelope that she look for information about guys between the ages of 16 and 29, and they must not be married. Then there will be a complex knot of extractions. If he was married, his spouse might misunderstand, and that would increase the risk that the case would be known to other people in the neighborhood besides her, so Sasha didn't want to take that risk. Penelope replied that of course she will help the mistress and will look into the matter and make a list. The protagonist made up her mind and told Penelope something that should be top secret, and no one should know about it except her. Penelope understood the seriousness of the situation and began to listen carefully to the mistress. Alexandra said that this list should be brought as soon as possible, and as much and as detailed as possible. After a while, Penelope brought mistress a whole stack of paper and said that while she was looking at the material, she was amazed and could not believe that the imperial family was so large. Sasha said that she was as amazed as Penelope and decided to ask how she had managed to study everything in such detail so quickly. The maid of honor replied that it took her a little time to do it secretly. Alexandra thanked Penelope for a good job and started studying the lists. The first one had a big appetite and was not disciplined and didn't know how to take care of people. And after all, how can you run a huge empire if you can't manage even within your own territory? The second was a pessimistic and indecisive mama's boy. And the third, a pervert with an unusual history of relationships with women. The fourth nobleman who lost all his savings in a gambling game, and all these candidates were not suitable for the girl. This country values bloodlines, and she can't stray too far from Thomas II. To find a new emperor, you need someone who can prove his ability and competence beyond the bloodlines of the three heirs, or he won't be able to quell the opposition of the nobility. Suddenly in the lists, she saw Lacus Breo din Honrus, who was also a member of the imperial family she had buried in the past. He was Thomas II's cousin, Thomas I's nephew, in other words, Cleo's great-uncle. Unlike cousins who spend their entire lives in the outskirts of the capital, Lacus was an unusual case. He was in charge of the borderlands. The strangest thing was that he was currently not in the Duchy of Ornis, but in the south of the empire, but in Erneb County, which was in the northern part. The reasons why he chose Erneb over the more convenient territory of Ornis had been clarified, but people disagreed, as he had the blood of his father, the youngest cavalry commander. Most thought it was loyalty and patriotism to protect the empire from outside forces. But Alexandra thought otherwise. Even though she had only met him twice in her life, she saw him as the kind of man who would use any means and methods to achieve his goals. She saw the exact same look in his eyes as in hers, as if he was about to bite her throat. And this guy was really good at what he did. He was 26 years old. He was the Duke of Ornis and Earl of Erneb. His father had died in the war when Lacus was still in the womb. Having been born without a father, he had excelled at swordsmanship from an early age. With a brilliant mind, he inherited the command of House Ornis from his parents at the age of 14. I'm sorry he lost his father at such an early age, and now he lives in Erneb County, holding his breath. The moment the protagonist saw his eyes, she realized that it was definitely the look of a man who would be content with just protecting the borders. And this man was also dangerous. He was undoubtedly someone who would one day return to the imperial palace and seize the throne. That was how Alexandra had assessed him in her past life, and that was why she had sent him to the other world. But things were different now. For first of all, what has changed is that she no longer loves Cleo as she used to. And secondly, the girl needs an ally who would be ambitious and smart, and if her assessment is correct, he would not refuse to cooperate well. And lastly, whether she can make him disappear as successfully as before. After all, she still vividly remembers the effort it took to take his life. Alexandra had been investigating his weaknesses for a long time, continuously looking for people from his surroundings, spreading rumors and sowing doubts about him in the minds of others. All this had a gradually growing effect, and in the end, Lacus was caught for treason against the state, and he died an innocent man. This time, the protagonist should not have made him her enemy, and of course there is no guarantee that Lacus will approve of her proposal, may refuse, which is very unlikely. Then she will have to get rid of Lacus as soon as possible. Alexandra had found a man who could help her, but the problem now was different. She didn't know how she could get to him, and couldn't figure out how to contact him, and under what pretext. After all, if you think about it, why would she suddenly want to contact her great-uncle Lacus? And unfortunately, she has no excuses except that the more distance between them, the more chances that they will be tailed. Consequently, sending personal letters is also dangerous. It was very risky to transmit the content in writing. which meant that there was nothing left but to meet him directly. But it was extremely difficult to do so, because even his own territory, the Duchy of Ornis, he visits only twice a year, and he has no reason to visit the imperial capital, with which he is not connected in any way. So the imperial palace is out of the question. While Alexandra was thinking it over, she heard her name being called, and it turned out that Lady Daenerys wants to see the protagonist. The opportunity given to the girl to return to the past is nothing but an unexplainable privilege to correct the mistakes of the past, so this privilege she will actively use. Daenerys Della El Linuas of House Linuas greeted Alexandra. Sasha said she was not very fond of such greetings. Daenerys is the legitimate eldest daughter of House Linuas. The protagonist didn't have a very close relationship with her, but they often exchanged words at social gatherings. And most importantly, Alexandra liked her attitude, the way she tried to be polite to others until the very end, and the way she maintained the necessary distance keeping intimacy, and carefully blocked out anything that could ignite a quarrel. Veronica replied that just the first greeting is very important. Besides, even if Her Majesty doesn't say so now, she can never know when she might change her mind. Alexandra said that Lady Linuas can do as she wishes, and it would most likely be inappropriate to interfere. Daenerys thanked Her Imperial Majesty for her concern. Then she put a box on the table and congratulated her on her marriage. It appeared that she had prepared a gift for Alexandra to celebrate her new status as Imperial Princess and hoped she would like it all very much. Sasha replied that she was the most sensitive and attentive of them all, so she was sure she would like the gift. Then she opened the box and saw saucers with rats in them. Veronica explained that in the Belgian kingdom, items with rats symbolize happiness and home comfort. Besides, she thought about the fact that other people would give expensive jewelry and dresses, so Daenerys decided to prepare something special and unusual for Alexandra. And of course, if the girl didn't like it, she could bring something else. Sasha rushed to say that she liked everything very much and thanked for this meaningful gift that she will remember forever. And the picture of the rats is so beautiful, it's a shame to even use this dishware. Daenerys smiled and said that if Alexandra really liked the dishes, she could send her more later. The protagonist said that just saying that made her happy. Daenerys said that she was very happy that she liked it, and it really wasn't hard to give her such a gift. Sasha smiled and said that depending on whether or not a person would do such a simple thing, their credibility and reputation might change. Daenerys thanked Her Majesty for appreciating her. Alexandra decided to talk about her principles and said that treating proper people with care and value is the way to success. Daenerys got embarrassed and said that Her Majesty greatly overestimates her. The protagonist smiled and said that the Imperial Palace said that people like her, that is calm and quiet, have a better chance of survival, so she would like to have someone like her by her side. Daenerys was surprised and decided to ask if this meant that Alexandra wanted to make her her maid of honor. The protagonist said that good intuition is one of her abilities, and apparently Lady Veronica. Before reincarnation, Alexandra didn't make Veronica her maid of honor, not because she didn't like her, but because she didn't trust people. But now, after reincarnation, Sasha is a different person altogether. She didn't think that Maleta, who had been overly loyal to her and Penelope, who had left her too soon, would be the only people who would be able to retrace her probably path when she lost her way. If she had Daenerys as her maid of honor back then, she would have warned her against being too dreamy and warned her to let Alexandra come to her senses. She is a quiet but serious girl with a strong will, and people close to power sometimes need someone to give them a warning, even an unpleasant one. But Alexandra realized this truth only after her death. Among these people, the most reliable was none other than Daenerys, so this time she needs someone like her. The girl told Lady Veronica that she is a calm and usually confident person, but also someone who will stop Alexandra when she goes down the wrong path, and of course she sincerely needs someone who will not let her destroy herself. Daenerys has noticed that Alexandra talks as if she has already experienced a terrible collapse once before. The protagonist said that without someone like Lady Daenerys, the collapse could happen in the near future. The girl could not believe what Her Highness was saying and worriedly asked why Alexandra decided to choose her, because there are many strong and honest ladies in the Empire, and there are many more noble and honorable people than Veronica. Sasha replied that Daenerys is the only one who asks such questions, and that is very good. Besides, she is the only one Alexandra knows. If she allowed a stranger to be around her and trusted them with her personal freedom, she wouldn't feel comfortable. And also, if Veronica needs time to think, she can wait. The girl replied that in all likelihood, she would not be able to make a decision alone, and she needed to go back and consult with her parents, and then she could come back and give her answer. Alexandra replied that she would look forward to hearing from Veronica. Suddenly, the two daughters of the Earl of Essex arrived and decided to congratulate the protagonist on becoming an imperial princess, and also congratulate her on her marriage. Alexandra thanked Lady Candace and Lady Candida for the congratulations. They are said to be too free-spirited and quite frivolous, as well as terrible gossipers. One of the sisters handed the girl a gift and said that it was certainly not the best present, but they had tried to prepare it, and besides, it was quite a popular item in the capital lately. Alexandra opened the box and saw a kind of underwear. Candace told Her Majesty that now it is the most popular underwear in the capital. The protagonist was not happy with this gift and couldn't understand the purpose of them presenting it to her. She would not have paid attention to it if she and the Count's sisters were on close terms. But now they had a social meeting and they said hello only a couple of times, and so it was clear that these girls were terribly ill-mannered. Sasha thanked Lady Candace and Lady Candida for the gift. The sisters replied that they were honored that Her Highness was pleased with the gift. Suddenly, one of the Earl's daughters said their throats were dry and asked for a cup of tea. Alexandra was very surprised that they were even going to have tea, but she couldn't afford to say that, so she apologized for her oversight and offered them a cup of tea. Lady Candace and Lady Candida admired the flavor of the tea and decided to ask if Alexandra liked life in the imperial palace. The protagonist put on a smile and replied that living in the imperial palace was quite comfortable. Besides, His Imperial Majesty the Prince is very kind, and their Imperial Majesties, the Empresses, are very compassionate, and also their Royal Highnesses are very loving, respectful. So Alexandra is confident that in the future she will be able to comfortably spend time in the imperial palace. The girl said that in this case they can be calm for the princess, and besides she has a calm expression on her face. It seems that life in the imperial palace suits her well. Lady Candace asked Sasha if she had heard the news that the Countess of Women had gone bankrupt, and that the Countess of Women was spending a lot of money on balls. This time, the amount of spices bought by her is amazing, and it has come to the point that the Countess of Lady is into gambling, and as a result she is bankrupt, and most likely they will have to sell their estate. In addition, the land of the county female pretty good, maybe some nobleman who wants to buy them. In fact, the land of the county of women is not the kind of land that can be sold at a throwaway price. It is located in close proximity to the imperial capital and have good transportation communication with the imperial palace. The climate there is mild, a good place for farming and ordinary life. The protagonist was thinking about what she could buy. Suddenly, Lady Candace asked Alexandra if she needed a maid of honor, because they thought about the fact that Her Majesty would need a maid of honor if she was going to spend time in the Palace d'Yen. Sasha replied that she hadn't thought about it yet, since she had only been in the palace for one day. Even if the protagonist was dying of boredom in the palace, she wouldn't want people like that around her, not to mention they are very frivolous. Candida got upset and said that if Alexandra needed a maid of honor that she could trust, that she would be sure to let them know. The protagonist smiled naively and said that she would be sure to let them know if anything happened, but in reality, she was sure that she would never turn to them. Alexandra noticed that she was very tired because these sisters were terribly chatty, but anyway, the girl could not think of a way to contact Lacus. The territory of Ernaba County is in the north of the empire, and it doesn't look like it could be inhabited by humans. Snow falls there almost every day throughout the year, with terrible blizzards and piercing cold winds blowing at all hours of the day and night. The people living there produce alcoholic beverages with an alcohol content of over 40%. Only one thing succeeded in the harsh conditions, and that is military might so harsh a climate that even being naked outside was enough for training. The Knights of Erneb trained to constantly go beyond their limits. This was also the reason why Erneb, unlike other borderlands, never had a problem with invasions from outside forces. There was a man named Lionel Riderman in this place, and he was the commander of the Erneb cavalry, who no one could surpass in strength. Lionel was shouting at the warriors, telling them that with such meager abilities, they would not be able to defend Erneb. Suddenly from the crowd came the voice of His Majesty, who wanted to try to fight Lionel. The commander was very surprised because His Majesty was busy, to which he replied that it did not mean that he could miss the regular evaluation of knights that happens only once a month, and it is most important to him. The commander said that if he was really going to fight him, then he was not going to be ceremonious. His Highness Lacus replied that he didn't even remember asking him to do so, and if Lionel tried to fight not at full strength, then he would have to resign as cavalry commander. After that, a fight broke out, in which Lacus was winning steadily, and finally, he presented his sword to Lionel's throat, which meant that His Majesty had won. The cavalry captain said that he was ashamed of himself, but Lacus replied that there was nothing to be ashamed of since he had fought well and had improved his skills greatly. Lionel replied that he knew that something that Lacus sits in his office all day long is a lie. If you consider his skills, then you can conclude that he comes to the training ground every day. Lacus replied that that's why geniuses are feared, because they don't have to work hard. But their abilities are the same, and that Lionel's loss is not something to be ashamed of. The commander replied that there is no swordsman who would not be ashamed when he meets His Highness in battle. Lacus replied that it was unnecessary because there was no one who could defeat him, at least in this empire, and so they should rightfully earn respect for being able to stand up to him for a little while at least. Also, Lionel is an excellent swordsman, so Lacus asked not to reprimand the knights for not being able to defeat him. Lionel replied that, in other words, it is the limit of mediocrity when whoever is there has to catch up and overtake them. His Highness said the same thing happens with the gifted. If tomorrow a genius is born who surpasses him, he will be defeated in the blink of an eye. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by Sir Keith, who was Lacus's best friend whom he valued and hated more than anyone else. Keith rushed as fast as he could because the counts had done it. He had just received news from the capital. The stone that had just started spinning would definitely not stop, not knowing that a cliff was waiting for him in the end. It turned out that it seemed that the gamblers who had been lurking around the Countess of Women had finally done their job after losing all their assets and being on the verge of bankruptcy. The Countess had finally put the territory up for sale with a price of 10 million gold pieces. One could conclude that they were in a terrible predicament. It should be said that no matter how large the territory of the empire suitable for agriculture, land combining a favorable climate and fertile soil is not so much. One of them is the territory of Women's County. Moreover, its proximity to the imperial capital allows its owner to play the role of a court aristocrat. It was undoubtedly one of the few valuable lands in the country, and to acquire the county of Feminine for only 10 million gold was a trifle. Lacus told his friend that as it had been planned in advance, and they needed to buy the land as quickly and as secretly as possible, but it should in no way look like they had suspicious plans. Keith asked how many months it took them to come up with this plan, and it turns out it was 6 months. 6 months ago, they had a plan to acquire the Earl of Womankind, but they didn't understand how they could do it because the Earl was still alive and well, and moreover, he was living with his adult sons. And so they thought about just buying another piece of land comparable to the Earl of Woman's, and it probably wouldn't interfere with the realization. Lacus replied that there was no land comparable to the Earl of Woman's territory, and besides, he needed the title of Earl of Woman more than anything else. Keith proposed a great idea, because the only way to make the Earl himself give up his lands, voluntarily but at the same time forcibly, and that idea was bankruptcy. The plan was to bribe the women close to the Earl to call him to gamble, and the Countess would be induced to buy luxury goods. Gambling and extravagance are things you can never stop once you've tried them. Lacus asked Kate how things were going in the palace, and he replied that everything had not changed much, except that the third prince had found a princess, and that it didn't seem to be the most necessary information, because the third prince was the one who was furthest away from inheriting the throne. Lacus replied that sometimes information that seems unnecessary can work to their advantage, so he told Kate not to take things so lightly and to keep an eye on things. Meanwhile, Daenerys arrived at Jane's palace and eventually agreed to Alexandra's request. The protagonist couldn't believe how quickly she got used to life in the imperial palace, and it seems that her first choice after her return is already very successful. Suddenly, Daenerys notified Alexandra that the territory of the county has already been bought. The girl was taken aback because she didn't expect the lands to be bought so soon. But on the other hand, 10 million gold coins is too cheap compared to the real value of the territory, but it is not a small amount of money. Not many aristocratic families are able to raise that much money so quickly. Alexandra asked Veronica if she knew who exactly bought the land. The girl replied that she knew, and it was Count Ernaba, namely His Highness the Duke of Ornis. Of course, before the reincarnation of Alexandra, Lacus also bought the land of the Count of Erneb. But it is too early to rejoice at the events that are repeating themselves, because the situation has changed. Of course, it will be very good if Lacus is on Alexandra's side, but if it's the other way around, things will be bad. Daenerys said that maybe it's her imagination, but it's all strange. Namely the situation with the former Earl of the Lady. Daenerys didn't know him well, but she didn't think he was a gambler, and it seems odd that he's suddenly into it. Gambling had been around for a long time, but it wasn't very popular in the capital. Alexandra replied that you don't need any special reason to fall in love with such games, because you can become addicted to them quite by accident. Suddenly, the protagonist came to the realization that perhaps it was all someone's plot, and someone deliberately addicted the Count to gambling, and the Countess to buy luxury goods, thus creating this situation. The merchant ship in which the Count had invested half a year ago was damaged by a storm, and the entire cargo sank to the bottom, and the damage was catastrophic. The Count wanted to make up for the loss, as many nobles would not want to admit that they had lost more than they had gained, and the loss of money would make the Countess womanly cool towards him. The damage caused by the accident must have broken his heart, and the only way to make money and heal his jaded heart was this. People who have failed once will try hard to avoid it next time, and sometimes they cannot make a rational decision because the compulsive desire not to fail this time makes their judgment inadequate. Of course, Alexandra's words made sense, but Daenerys could not understand who would do such a thing and why, or whether it was the same person who had bought the lands. The protagonist replied that perhaps Daenerys was right, and to get an answer to that question, it would be better to ask the person who most wanted the Earl's lands. Lacus's friend said that there is a major remodeling and renovation going on at the Earl's female residence, and everything, even the services in the mansion, have been changed. Meanwhile, Elwyn asked Alexandra what necklace she would like to wear with her dress, as she thought pearls and lapis lazuli were very suitable for her. The girl said that she would wear a pearl necklace because lapis lazuli is not suitable for her, because there cannot be two monarchs under the same sky. The protagonist asked Elwyn to remember what she was talking about, or rather, it's the risk of using the same people who served the previous monarch. Tonight, they will go to the ball minimally dressed, because they should not be conspicuous by any means. It is necessary to dress in moderation so as not to compromise one's dignity while maximizing one's imperial majesty and never showing a flaw. There is a natural rivalry in the imperial house for the rightful heir. The maid of honor asked whether Alexandra had finished with the choice of jewelry. The girl replied that a necklace, earrings, and a ring would be enough. Naturally, the two main figures are Jeremy, that is the first prince, and Janaska, the second prince, and the third principal, who is relatively weak in terms of power, and even lost his mother, is not able to take advantage of the situation. But that doesn't mean he can't avoid checks and balances, so Alexandra has decided not to overreact. She and her husband are not interested in the question of a legacy. They prefer to be content with the position they are destined to play. The maid of honor asked the girl if she had heard the news that the Duke of Ornis would be at tonight's ball, to everyone's surprise. Elwyn heard it by chance yesterday, that the day after His Highness the Duke acquired the territory of the County of Ornis, he wrote a letter of reply to the Department of the Imperial Palace. Alexandra's meeting with Lacus her in her past life had been, and certainly not today, and she learned about him much later, and fortunately things were going much better than the girl thought. Suddenly came His Highness the Third Prince. When he saw Alexandra, he said that she was incredibly beautiful today, but he noticed that at other balls she was dressed more brilliantly, and today she looked less dressed. The girl replied that now that she was a member of the imperial family, she had decided to cut back on such extravagance. Cleo stretched her hand to the face of the protagonist, saying that no matter whether she was dressed up or not, she always remained the very person who radiated light by her mere presence. When the princess and the prince were walking towards the hall, Cleo said that there would be quite a lot of nobles gathered, so she decided to ask if the girl was worried about it. Alexandra replied that she was not worried because there were just as many people at their wedding, but today she will be as a princess, not as his bride. Also, Alexandra had recently presented the palace empress with one of the most popular and recent dresses, and today was His Majesty the Emperor's wedding anniversary, and it would be rude to come empty-handed. Cleo apologized that it should have been his job to do it, but in the end, it was the princess who had to do it. The girl thought that all this is absurd, because when he betrayed her, he took her life at that moment and was not even going to apologize to her. But now he is apologizing for something stupid. Lacus came to the banquet and greeted the emperor. The emperor was surprised to see him, because Lacus was not often at balls, so he had almost forgotten his face. Lacus apologized for making His Majesty miss him, but unfortunately he was busy managing the territories and defending the border. The emperor was always grateful to Lacus for his hard work. After all, the emperor used to get a report of trouble happening on the border. But ever since he went to Erneb, such reports had ceased. Lacus replied that otherwise His Majesty, who is busy with his political duties, cannot be bothered about trifles. When Lacus saw Diana's piercing gaze, he decided to ask how Her Highness and the Empress were doing. Telsia replied that nothing had changed for her, and she was going about her business supporting His Majesty. Lacus said that he had sent the Empress something to add a little zest to this unchanging daily life, so he decided to ask if she had received anything. But the Empress didn't understand what he was talking about. Lacus clarified that he couldn't help but prepare some kind of gift for the Emperor's wedding anniversary. So if Diana didn't like what she saw, he asked her to be sure to say so, and he could replace the gift with something more appropriate. Suddenly, the Emperor decided to ask Lacus if he really bought the territory of the county female. Lucky confirmed his words because the Earl of Women was so addicted to gambling that he missed his fortune. And so he was on the verge of bankruptcy. And Lacus didn't think it was enough to sell the estate of the Honorable Earl of Woman, and to give such precious land to an unknown person would probably be an insult to the imperial family. So he bought the territories himself. The Emperor asked why he would then not take such an opportunity and join the council. Lacus was surprised and said that he was the kind of man who had lived his whole life with a sword in his hand, and he wasn't very competent and didn't think it was something to do. The Emperor said that Lacus, after all, already owns 2 territories and is confident that he is well suited for such a role. Lucky said that this is a very serious matter and he needs time to think about it. At that moment, Alexandra came in with Cleo. Lacus evaluated the girl with a glance and remembered that she was the only daughter of Marquis Sieglinde, who had married 3 princes not so long ago. And at first glance, she seemed to be more than delicate. She seems nothing more than a delicate, innocent beauty, but there is something cold about her. The Emperor introduced his daughter-in-law to Lacus, and the latter was delighted to meet Her Majesty the Princess. Alexandra was honored to meet His Highness Duke, because she had only heard about him in stories, so she was very happy to meet him in person. The girl was indeed very happy to meet him in person, because she had started looking for him, and he had arrived at once, and she had not expected that they would meet so soon. Alexandra turned to Lacus and said that she had heard that he had settled in the territory of the county. The female county is very close to the capital, so she hoped that they would be able to see each other more often from now on. Lacus replied that he would do his best to make sure that they would see each other more often. When Alexandra saw the Empress, she complimented her on how beautiful and incredibly attractive she looked today. Telsia replied that maybe it was because of her age, but the word attractive sounds nice even if it is a lie. Alexandra replied that she was honest with Her Highness, and if she asked anyone in the entire imperial capital, they would tell the Empress the same thing. And also, the girl was very pleased that she was wearing the very dress she had given her. The Empress disdainfully looked at the girl and said that just this dress looked very beautiful that she couldn't look at anything else. Originally, this dress was to be presented to the empress by the emperor a year later, so Alexandra repeated the design of that dress that she treasured and loved most until her death. The protagonist said that she was very glad that Her Highness liked the girl's gift. Empress Telsia said that now that they had said hello, they could go and enjoy the festivities. Lacus decided to ask the emperor how Alexandra and Cleo got married. Initially, the emperor did not understand the question and asked what exactly Lacus meant. The count asked if the emperor had sent a letter from the imperial palace to the residence of the Marquis of Sieglinde for a council meeting to discuss whether they should marry. Thomas replied that none of the proposed options coincided with the truth, because they simply fell in love with each other and got married, because the princess was so in love with the third prince that she herself asked him to marry her. In addition, she has no problems with the origin, and she herself is pretty and young girl. So he gave his consent to the marriage. After a while, Lucky decided to move away, but suddenly Alexandra flew into him and accidentally poured a drink on his suit. The girl apologized to him, but Lucky replied that it was no big deal, and he was just thinking of going back and waiting for the carriage to pull up. Alexandra worriedly asked him if he was leaving. The count replied that not much time had passed since he had bought the territory of the county, and he still had work to do. The girl took the opportunity to say that it was not far from here to Jen's palace, so she suggested Lacus to take a little walk. The count replied that Her Highness need not worry so much. But the girl said that she was very ashamed in front of him all he had come quite a long way, and she couldn't let him go just like that. After a while, Alexandra and Lacus were drinking tea, and the count remarked that it seemed that tea drinking was a quiet affair in the imperial palace. The girl replied that it was not quite so because she was thinking about how she could have a more intimate conversation with him, and the silence lengthened a little. Asked that did she really need that much time to think about it. Alexandra said that if he promised her he would only tell her the truth, her excitement would disappear. The count said that she talks as if she doesn't trust him, to which came a counter question from the girl if he trusts her. Lacus replied that if he didn't trust her, he wouldn't be here right now. Alexandra said that it was all very nice, and as far as she was concerned, he was the one who bought the earldom of the woman. The count asked that she did not know about it until now, because everyone knows about it. The girl replied that she knew about it, but she had only recently realized that he had arranged it, that is, that he had brought the count to bankruptcy. After all, the earl liked the territory of the female earldom, and he would never give it away even if he went mad. And if he did, it would hardly be for such pennies as now. And so Alexandra assumes that everything was carefully planned, and there is only one way to make the count give up the lands himself, and without effort, and that is bankruptcy. So Lacus's men lived in luxury with the count and his wife, and after a while, these men bribed even the people close to him, so that the count would gradually get sucked into the games and would not be able to get out. And then everything became exactly as Lacus had imagined. Lacus replied that the girl had excellent judgment, and she definitely had the makings of a writer. And if she was worried about her status as a princess, why wouldn't she write novels under a pseudonym? Alexandra was flattered, but sometimes reality itself really does feel like a novel. Lucky asked with concern what Her Highness wanted to say with all this. The girl smiled and told him not to make such a scary face and why he was so concerned. The count asked what was the basis of her confidence that he was the one who organized all this, although there was no proof, and he was just very curious to know about it. Alexandra replied that she had just received all the necessary proof of the word, the first reason. If His Highness was not really plotting anything, then there would not be such a reaction as there is now, and that's why she can confidently say such a thing. Lacus suggested that perhaps there were other reasons why she might think that. Alexandra answered that the second reason is a guess, but it can't be called a reason. But otherwise, it would be strange, because he bought the lands for 10 million gold less than a week after they appeared on the market, and it was too obvious. Lacus replied that he just had a little extra 10 million gold. And how does Her Majesty know that everyone wants the lands of the County of Women? It's one of the 5 richest lands in the world, and that's not enough to want it. Alexandra answered that he is certainly right, and thinks that it is possible to think about it in this way. But this is not the most important thing, because the most important reason is that he and no one else bought the territory of the County of Women. And this is the most important proof, and she thought that he and no one else is capable of such a thing. The Count was concerned and asked who she thought he was, and the girl replied that she didn't think he knew her well. At least he knew much more about him than he did about her, and he wouldn't believe her even if she told him everything. Lacus asked what the purpose of this whole conversation was, and Alexandra suddenly asked if he wanted the throne. The Earl replied that her behavior was extremely disrespectful and said that she thought about it and wondered why he needed a female, or rather, why he needed the position of Earl of the Female, and why he suddenly moved to the female. Although he had spent so much time in Ernaby living away from Ornis, and while she was pondering this question, an outrageous hypothesis occurred to her that the House of Feminine had been involved in the political movements of the Empire for generations. In Erneb, where Lacus ruled, he must have many well-trained soldiers whose skills were honed as they fought to the fear of death in sub-zero temperatures under the pretense of protecting the borders. On the other hand, Ornis, which was given to Lacus by his ancestors, has such fertile soil that the grains harvested from it should bring him huge profits, even after he has fed his people and his troops. Now that he has both economic and military power, the only thing left is political. He has not entered the world of politics, and no nobleman would think of helping him organize a rebellion. Lacus answered that if she continues this conversation, she will become a traitor. Alexandra asked if he wants to say something, or if she is wrong, but maybe he has already noticed that she is sure that she is right in her words, and she does not risk her life saying all this as a joke. Lacus asked that even if she was, what was she trying to say, and Alexandra had offered to cooperate and make him emperor. The Count said indignantly that the girl is out of her mind and has she forgotten that she is the wife of a prince. Alexandra asked him if he knew why she was talking to him about this, and if he knew who started it all. And it was her husband, the third prince of the Rhea Empire. That is his cousin's son, and she brought it up because she wants revenge on him. Camp asked if she would work with him while they fell into the depths of hell together with her husband. Alexandra hastened to say that he misunderstood her because she was not going to fall with him, because only her husband would go there. Lacus asked what the girl meant. Alexandra said that first she would make him emperor, and that was her priority. Then she will steal his crown to make sure he falls from the highest point to the maximum depth possible, and then give that crown to Lacus. And either way, he will be the winner. Lacus said that Alexandra had made a serious mistake now, because if it was true that she knew him well, she should not have told him first, because she should have waited for him to come to her, or she could have arranged for him to come of his own free will. The girl asked if either of those options would be safe, and she knows the risks involved. But as she said, Alexandra knows him better than he knows her, and of course, he will not go straight to the emperor out of those doors. Alexandra also thinks that he will not be able to accuse her of treason, and this is because His Majesty also already looks at him with a suspicious eye. If she is executed for treason together with her husband, he will not get anything from her husband's death. Lacus said that he doesn't know what her methods are, but it seems that Alexandra has made little effort for me to study him. Of course, if Her Highness is not mistaken, he is not going to rush to His Majesty leaving this room because he has no evidence that this conversation ever took place, so the disadvantages of telling the Emperor outweigh the pros for him. Even so, she must not assume that he will accept her offer, and why she is so sure that he will. Alexandra said that if he won't work with her, she asked him to get his coat from her maid, who is waiting outside, and he can leave the palace. Jen, of course she won't detain him, but he should be aware that by leaving this place now, he will also become her enemy, and she can't leave alive someone who knows her true intentions. Asked if she was trying to scare him, Alexandra replied that she was, and that should help because, as she said, she knows him much better than he knows her. Lacus admits that the girl's family is not at all visible. Marquise Sieglinde is an excellent politician, but she also admits that he should strengthen his economic and military power considering her words. Alexandra replied that if he takes into account the House of Coleridge, Empress of Tursilla, the House of Igorella, Empress of Consort Vincestia, and her homeland of Laufez, as well as the military might of the many prominent families that support the houses of these two dukes, Given all of this combined, he was sure that Erneb's soldiers could emerge victorious if a conflict broke out, no matter how many soldiers he had. Since it would still be less than the combined means of all the soldiers in the empire now, Lacus replied that wars are not won based on numbers of men alone. Alexandra said that he is right, of course, and for the empress and her husband, she is an enemy, which they naturally fear. But that's not the point, because she wants to say that even if she doesn't get help from them, she is quite capable of destroying him. Lacus replied that she has unimaginable confidence, and one wrong step, and everything will turn against her. Alexandra replied that she is fully confident in her abilities, and especially she has recently returned to life after being in hell. The girl said that she would give him 5 minutes to answer her question, because they both should not be absent for so long. Otherwise, people would get suspicious. So he should choose whether he would be her enemy or her ally.